I do? Thanks, Futa, but you're not being a help. Come on. Maskana. Come on, take it down. Down a notch. What? No, don't do that. Free on everything. God damn it, you. Oh. Hello, you guys. This... Persona 5 is sure fun? I was not very productive in April, was I? As I continue making videos at the lovely speed of snail, let's mix things up for a bit of a change and do some more general analysis of the Persona series this time around, rather than just analysis of the major arcana. Because, believe it or not, my original intention with Lost in Context was to explore all of the context and not just a part of it. I mean, that's why the show is called Lost in Context and not Nanny's Super Happy Tarot Arcana Fun Time. Let me write that one down for a moment. Oh well, better late than never, I guess. Time to dust off the regular old Lost in Context logo and get crackin'. Since Persona 5 just recently released in English and I am sitting on the footage for my entire Japanese playthrough of the game, and I figure enough time has passed in these couple of weeks for at least a sizable portion of the fans to have seen the end credits by now, I guess this is as good a time to get started with looking into the context, lore, and contextualized lore behind this one as ever. So I get myself a little idea. In preparation for this video, I asked the readers of my blog to send me questions regarding Persona 5's lore and its connections and relations to the lore of past Persona games. So guess what we're gonna have a look at now? Ladies and gentlemen and others, cats, buses, and cats turning into buses. Sit back and observe as I examine
Lost in Context, Persona Q&A, First Edition, Demons and Deities.
Now, before we begin, be aware that this video does in fact contain
heavy spoilers for all parts of Persona 5.
And if you do not wish to see or hear
heavy spoilers for all parts of Persona 5,
you'd be best advised to turn off the video now. You have been warned.
Heavy spoilers for all parts of...
Buffalo on Tumblr asks, is Zelda both Nyarlathotep? And does Lavenza have any more connection to Philemon than the rest of the Velvet Room attendants? She's the only one we've seen share the butterfly motif. Alright, nice start. Philemon and Nyarlathotep, huh? Guess it's time to get out some of that P1 and P2 footage. Before we proceed here, I think it's important that all of my viewers here understand a thing or two about the collective unconscious and archetypes as they are used in the series. So please, if you have no idea what I mean by that, go and watch my video on the collective unconscious first. A link to that one will be in the description. Okay, is everybody in the know now? Yes? Alright, let's continue. First of all, let's get into what exactly Nyarlathotep and Philemon even are. Appearing in the first 3 games of the series, Persona 1, Persona 2 Innocent Sin, and Persona 2 Eternal Punishment, these 2 characters are key figures initiating and driving the plot of especially the Persona 2 duology. The lore behind them is as follows. Philemon and Nyarlathotep are the anthropomorphic representations of the collective unconscious itself, with Philemon ruling over its positive side and representing all of humanity's creative potential and goodwill, while Nyarlathotep rules over the negative side of the collective unconscious, representing all of humanity's destructive potential and/or vices and malevolence. Accordingly, Philemon has domain over all personas and the ability to bestow them upon people. Meanwhile, Nyarlathotep has domain over all shadows and is able to control and shape them to his liking. Now, while these two are never directly referred to as gods in the games they actually appear in, by the definition made apparent in later installments, it's plainly obvious that Philemon and Nyarlathotep are, in fact, deities in much the same way as Erebus, Izanami, Mikuratana, Kronos, Kagutsuchi, and yes, even Yaldabaoth are deities. To make this even more obvious, let me quote a bit from the canonical Q&A section of the Persona 3 club book, published after the release of Persona 3 in Japan. Now, this section of the book, for some reason, was written in an in-character style, with the author of the section pretty much role-playing as characters from Persona 3, so you'll have to excuse me as I try to do some voices here. How were people in ancient times, when seas did not exist, able to avert the fall? Ah, a very good question. You see, when it originally only were hundreds of thousands of people wishing for death, the negative effects this had on the seal were only very small. After all, there are many more people than just that in the world, aren't there? The combined death wish of these few thousands of people did not suffice to break Nyx's binds. Moreover, people continued to give birth to abstract existences within the collective unconscious, which furthered human evolution even more. This is all rather complicated. To make it simple, this is what gave birth to mythology and religion. Certainly, you know of many stories of malevolent deities or demons being defeated by benevolent deities of virtues, which protect our world, do you not? These existences we call gods protect the balance in the suppressed, unconscious parts of our psyche. Their providence plays an important role in strengthening the seal against Nyx. Before you ask, yes, this does by extension mean that Nyx is in fact not a deity. The book actually goes into great detail explaining what Nyx actually is. However, right now I don't really have the time to go into that sort of detour without completely derailing the video, so you'll just have to trust me when I'm telling you that I plan to cover this topic very soon. Anyway, back on track. Deities in the Persona series aren't really the kind of gods that we traditionally imagine. They aren't the creators of the world or almighty forces ruling humanity. Rather, they are creations of our collective unconscious, representing specific archetypes and aspects contained within it. For example, Izanami is the goddess representing the human desire for a wish-granting mother. Mikuratana is the goddess representing human desire for painless relationships. Kronos is the god representing the human concept of finite time, and Erebus is the demon representing the human desire for death. By definition, it is quite clear that Philemon and Nyarlathotep, too, fall under the umbrella of deities in the Persona universe. However, it's not like they are just any deities. Rather, they are the deities to end all deities. Each of them represents half of the collective unconscious. Half. That's like 50%, you guys. That's a lot. Especially when compared to such puny aspects as individual desires, or simple concepts like time, or death, or whatever else comes to your mind. You could pretty much just simplify it all down and say that Philemon is the king of all benevolent deities, whereas Nyarlathotep is the supreme overlord of all malevolent deities. That's why, if the conditions are right, all Nyarlathotep has to do in order to nuke the whole world is to snap his fingers and stab a lady. He has the entire force of all human badness that ever existed and will ever exist at his disposal. Now, some of you might be asking, but if these two are so powerful, then why haven't we seen them do anything as of late? After all, helping to bring about the fall sounds like it would just be Nyarli's cup of tea, doesn't it? And Philemon's help sure would have been nice when Izanami went crazy and tried to turn all humans into mindless shadows, right? Well, it all comes down to the events of Persona 2 Eternal Punishment, specifically its final battle. In this battle, Maya's team, with enormous effort, manages to defeat Nyarlathotep and eventually deal the final killing blow to him. It is here that we learn two things about Philemon and Nyarlathotep. A. The two of them exist in symbiosis. As long as one of them exists, the other will exist as well, in the same form. And B, Nyarlathotep and Philemon cannot truly be destroyed. Since they are just representations of the collective unconscious itself, as long as humans exist, they too will continue existing in one form or another. This is very similar to what Elizabeth says about Erebus in Persona 4 Arena. So we can assume that this is true for all deities in the games. As long as the thing that they represent exists in the collective unconscious, they will keep being reborn. Many fans have taken this to mean that Nyarlathotep and Philemon must still be out there, existing in exactly the same way we've seen them in Persona 1 and Persona 2. However, that's not necessarily true. In Persona 4 the Golden, we see that deities are not necessarily reborn into the same form they initially took. When Izanami's power and domain are reborn into Marie, the only aspect of hers that had not been destroyed at that point. That seems to indicate that under specific conditions, it's entirely possible for a deity to come back in a very different form from before. To me, it would seem that that's probably what happened with Philemon and Nyarlathotep as well. Okay, so all that follows here now is just my theory, but I genuinely believe that I am onto something here, so please hear me out. We're now getting back to Bufula's question. Is Yaldabaoth Nyarlathotep? I would say, yeah, no, kind of. It's complex. Nyarlathotep himself has not appeared in the series ever since he was killed in the end of Persona 2. That much is true. However, there has been a suspicious increase in deities suddenly showing up and deciding all humans should die ever since he's been gone. Erebus wants to kill all humans, just like he did. So does Kagutsuchi. Yeah, he wasn't very successful, but the thought was there. And yes, even our dear demiurge himself, Yaldabaoth, has the same poor, low opinion of humanity as a whole that Nyarlathotep seemed to hold. So, here's my theory. When Maya's team destroyed Nyarlathotep, his gigantic complex archetype was not stable enough to be reborn into a single consistent shape. Instead, he split up into several aspects, much the same way Izanami and Chronos split themselves. Except when they did it, it was willingly. With Nyarli, it was probably a necessity. That would mean that all of the overpowered, outright evil deities we have fought ever since Persona 3, namely Erebus, Kagutsuchi and Yaldabaoth, are all incarnations of Nyarlathotep that either came into being or got a significant power boost, like Marie did, after Nyarlathotep was killed in the end of Persona 2. That would make Yaldabaoth, given his size and power, a really significant aspect and incarnation of Nyarlathotep, though not exactly the same as the original Nyarli. Similarly, it would also mean that if you were to fuse Erebus, Kagutsuchi and Yaldabaoth into one, you would probably get a being more similar to the original Nyarlathotep, though I assume that there are probably a few yet unthought aspects of him out there that would probably also be needed to make the fusion truly complete and bring about the return of the actual Nyarlathotep. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's move on to the next question. Does Lavenza have any more connection to Philemon than the rest of the Velvet Room attendants? She's the only one we've seen that shares the butterfly motive. Remember what I said about Philemon and Nyarlathotep existing in symbiosis? I think that's something very important to consider here. If Nyarlathotep really split up into aspects the way I propose he did, it would stand to reckon that the same also happened to Philemon. However, unlike the spike in evil overlords of edginess in the divine spectrum that I mentioned before, there haven't really been that many overpowered good-hearted deities to suddenly help us out in a pinch ever since that. Or have there? Dear viewers, this is the point of the video in which I would like to point your attention to the Velvet Room. Specifically, one important thing about it that I have not yet mentioned. The Velvet Room, and all in it, was created by Philemon. In Persona 1 and 2, it is explained that the Velvet Room is a place Philemon created to help Persona users contracted to him in their journey. The master of the room is Igor, a doll created by Philemon in order to find a meaning of life. Something Philemon seemed fascinated with due to his desire to help humanity ascend to a better existence. This is alluded to in Persona 3 FES when Igor compares himself to Aegis, thus making it clear that this is still the same Igor as in the previous games, even if Philemon is never mentioned. There's also Nameless and Belladonna, the couple of musicians playing the music you hear in the Velvet Room in every single game. So it's probably safe to assume that these guys are still around also, even in those games where you don't see them. They're probably off hiding in the broom closet or something. Then there's the Demon Painter, a human with the ability to capture persona powers on cards he paints, much like Yusuke in Persona 5. And no one else. Yep, that's right. Other than Igor, none of the people we associate most with the Velvet Room, namely the sibling assistants Elizabeth, Margaret, Theodore, or Lavenza, or anyone like them, ever appear in Persona 1 or 2. There, the compendium is simply held by Igor himself, and the need for an assistant is never even addressed. Not once. So, where did these siblings suddenly come from? And why are they siblings? Because they were all created by Philemon? Belladonna and Nameless never considered each other siblings. Igor sure doesn't seem to consider the assistants his siblings, and they sure don't seem to consider him their brother. So, what are Elizabeth and the others? Why are they so powerful, and where did they come from? Interestingly, even the Persona 3 clubbook refuses to give a concrete answer here. Upon being asked for her true identity, Elizabeth simply gives the delightful non-answer. I am simply me, nobody but Elizabeth. The question then goes on a tangent explaining the Frankenstein-themed naming behind the Velvet Room denizens and never comes back from it. Yeah. However, there are some interesting properties the Velvet Room denizens have. Firstly, they appear to be based on the concept of the anima animus archetype, which Jung characterized as the gatekeeper to the collective unconscious and to one's ability to create relationships, romantic or otherwise. Jung saw this archetype as always appearing as the gender opposite to the person contacting it, which would explain why Theodore, whose guest was a girl, appeared as a young man, while all of the male protagonists have female assistants watching over their compendium. In Jung's writings, the anima animus archetype is seen as a guide a person needs to find their connection to the collective unconscious. Similar to how the Philemon in Jung's writings, which personas Philemon was based on, is also referred to as a wise guiding spirit. The assistants also refer to themselves as the ones ruling over power, and while it is never disclosed what this power they rule over is exactly, they curiously display the ability to freely summon any persona of those whose compendium they hold. A reminder, Philemon was supposed to be the one ruling over all personas. Like Igor, they also display the ability to fuse personas, something that seems to not be a common ability even among deities, as Yelda Barth still requires the help of Caroline and Justine, the split form of Lavenza, to pull that off. And talking about Lavenza, remember how I said that deities can split themselves into aspects or fuse back together to make a bigger deity? Well, guess what happens with Lavenza in Persona 5? And just as Bufula pointed out so nicely, while Lavenza is split against her will, what shape does her true will take to the protagonist? Nothing other than a butterfly. The same shape Philemon took whenever he communicated with the Persona 1 or Persona 2 casts in the real world. Okay, I'll stop beating around the bush now and get to the point. Ever since a long while ago, I've had a theory that the Velvet Room siblings are, in fact, the split-up aspects of Philemon himself, and Persona 5 did nothing but further this impression in me. Not only does Lavenza pump the Philemon-related symbolism up to 11 in both of her forms, there's also the fact that Morgana, who's apparently really just an unusually small Velvet Room attendant with an equally small amount of power himself, is directly referred to as having been made from humanity's hope, something that would clearly qualify as an aspect of Philemon, who was all of humanity's goodness combined. That one scene in which Morgana hears Lavenza's voice also makes it seem as if she was trying to say, "You are my sibling" at the time, which, along with the very velvet woomish design of his ultimate persona, would only further the theory. It also helps that the Velvet Room attendants are all working tirelessly to discover the meaning of their lives. Something Philemon, as I mentioned previously, was very interested in. If this theory of mine is true, it would mean that Lavenza isn't any more related to Philemon than her siblings are. She simply happens to be the aspect of his carrying the ability of his to turn into a butterfly, as he always did. Now, of course, this theory inevitably also brings up the question, if Philemon is just split into pieces like Caroline and Justine were, then why doesn't Igor simply perform a fusion and put him back together? But at this point, I would like to remind you of a little detail again. Philemon and Nyarlathotep exist in symbiosis. This means if Philemon returns to being a single, unified, stable being, this would consequently also mean that Nyarlathotep too would return to his previous form, and their conflict would resume right where it left off, with the same intensity as before. As a small reminder, the intensity the battle had before Nyarlathotep was quote-unquote killed was responsible for destroying an entire timeline. I feel like Philemon perhaps prefers existing in the form of the Velvet Room siblings. Heck, maybe he even likes it. I mean, Elizabeth sure seems to be having the time of her life whenever she's on screen. Margaret sure knows how to enjoy herself too. Theodore is a little screwed maybe, but who cares about him? And heck, Lavenza didn't even seem too unhappy when she was split up into even smaller fragments of herself. Yeah, I'd say he definitely likes being a little family of benevolent terror. Alright, we are at the 20-minute mark now, so let's sum up my reply to Bufula's question real quickly. Dear Bufula, I think that Yaldabaoth is an aspect and incarnation of Nyarlathotep, and that Lavenza and all her siblings are incarnations of Philemon. But, regardless of how sure I am of this is still all just my very elaborate theory, so please, take it with a grain of salt until we get more information. Thank you. Phew. That was sure a long question to answer. Sure took a while too. Long enough to get dressed and... yeah, the sun is setting by now. Yeah, I don't think I can answer any more questions today without making this video hit the 30 minutes mark. Even though this was supposed to be a questions and answers, not a question and answer... whatever. Well, technically it was 2 questions, so I'm good? Are you good? I sure am good. I know I'm good, so maybe you're good too. Good then. Oh boy. Look, I promise I'll try to cover more questions next time around, but this topic really was rather complex, and I feel it did deserve a whole video to itself. Alright then, a huge thank you to Bufula on Tumblr for asking this question in the first place. I would never have thought of covering this without you. And to everybody else who sent in questions, I'll get to answer those as soon as possible. Well, that's it from me for now. I hope I cleared up a few things for some of you. I wish you all a wonderful day, and I'll see you all around. Later and bye!